Hey guys, so today I wanted to talk about the talks that I went to at NAMM. So before we start, I just wanted to talk about this week is supposed to be a shorty video, and this one might end up being a shorty video because I looked on the website here for NAMM and I was trying to figure out like what the rules are for posting video or content from their actual talks. And I looked all over the site. I looked all around and I couldn't really find any info on whether or not I can share the video from the talks that I took. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to talk really briefly about the different talks that I went to at NAMM this year, and I'm going to be looking at my notes when I do this. And that'll just give you guys a basic summary of what the talks were about, some of the interesting information that I got, and then I might show a few clips that I recorded from the actual talks. But I'm going to try to make it so that I don't post so much stuff that I get in trouble with either NAMM or YouTube, because I like both those organizations. I don't want to be in trouble with them, so... Sorry, there's so much noise here right now. They are vacuuming in the hallway of my apartment building. And then on the other side, on the window side, there's a truck, I think, emptying trash bins or something. It sounds like the trash truck. And then they're also leaf blowing. So I'm really sorry if there's some background noise here. I am in my apartment today, so there's that. Oh, and one more thing before we get started is that at the end of this video, I'm going to tell you guys some info that I got while I was at NAMM about how to actually access the video content for these talks. So stay tuned for that. All right, so let me open up my notes here. NAMM 2020. It's my to-do and my done list. All right, so I stopped by the Mix with the Masters booth and I saw part of the Chad Blake and Bob Clearmountain talk. And that seemed like a great talk. I just caught the end of it. And one of my big takeaways from this, it's kind of obvious, but was that Bob actually automates his threshold for his de-essers. So I'm going to try to start doing that more and see how that goes. So I also stopped by the Avid booth and I saw Andrew Sheps talk about the S1 at the Avid booth. And the really big thing that he was talking about with this talk is he was talking about folders and Pro Tools with the S1. And so basically the way the folders seem to work is it sounds like they're similar to aux tracks or VCA tracks. And I thought it was pretty cool that it's actually cross-platform compatible with other Pro Tools versions. So if someone doesn't have like an S1 with the newest version of Pro Tools, what you can do is you can actually send them your version of Pro Tools with the folders, and it'll translate that to something that's compatible with whatever version of Pro Tools they have. And I mean, you've probably heard about the folders by now, but I thought it was pretty cool. They said you can nest folders about 9 times. So you could, in theory, nest them until your whole song is in one huge folder full of nested folders. So that's another way you can organize your stuff. It's kind of like making folders for your stems or what have you, right? So I thought that was pretty interesting. It could be handy, and I guess I'll try it out at some point. I also saw some guy running around in like the pro audio, the recording audio section. It's like the basement of one of the buildings. And he was running around holding a microphone that didn't seem to be attached to anything. And it was like a bright color too. I think it was like neon green or something. And he was running around screaming like, Ableton will not save you, and acting like he was otherwise just acting like he was one of those crazy religious protesters, but he knew way too much about recording. So it was pretty funny. I think he was like a comedian or I don't know who he was. If anyone else saw this guy, let me know. Apparently, my husband ran into him in the bathroom later. That sounded like an interesting interaction, but sounds like a really funny guy. And so I also went to the Echo and the Canyon talk, which was all about legal cases where copyright infringement is accused. And I thought it was a really interesting talk. I think it's relevant to a lot of people. If you're writing your own music, it's obviously relevant. If you're working with people that write their own music, it's good to be able to advise them, right? So I think this talk could be really relevant to a lot of people, to a lot of you guys, right? So I definitely wanted to mention this one, so I might show you guys a clip from it in a minute here. So this talk had a lot of legal experts, right? So the woman in charge of the talk was actually a lawyer in the entertainment industry. And I forget her name. I'm not sure if I have it in my notes here, but if it pops up, I'll mention it. But she was great. And so the panel also had Paula Boggs, who has a lot of relevant legal information. And then also Virgil Roberts was really helpful with the actual legal side of things. And here I can zoom in on the photo of this slide so you can actually see, hopefully a little bit better, their actual bios. But yeah, it was a great panel. It also had Bob Clearmountain, right, who's an engineer and a producer. Hopefully you guys all know about Bob Clearmountain. He's huge in our industry, right? And then the panel also had Andrew Slater, right? So he directed the documentary Echo in the Canyon, which if you've seen it, let me know what you think in the comments below. I have not seen it yet, and now I want to see it. But yeah, you've probably heard of him. He was the CEO of Capitol Records. I mean, you can read his bio here. I don't know why I'm reading this stuff out loud to you guys. Anyway, so the talk was pretty interesting and informative. Bob Clearmountain, this is kind of a side note. He mentioned, I wrote this down because it's interesting to me, right, as an engineer. But basically, he mentioned that he has a new software. It sounds like they're like plugins for effects. But basically, he has new software coming out called Clearmountain's Domain. So that's something to keep an eye out for if you haven't heard of that already. Paula Boggs actually recommended and mentioned Keith Richards' autobiography during this conversation. And she mentioned that because he talked about how he only listened to blues for a while so that he could learn how they made the blues. So that's a good example, you know, of how white musicians were starting to listen to and try to learn from black music back then. And I mean, that's always a huge issue that's brought up whenever people are talking about copyright infringement, copyright issues, especially in a historical context. That's always a huge one to talk about. So yeah, they talked about the blurred lines case a bit. And actually this woman, Judith Fennell, I believe she said during the presentation that the I is not there in her name, the second I. But she was really interesting because she's a musicologist and she was actually an expert witness in the blurred lines case. And so she had a lot of really good, really relevant information about what the courts are actually looking at in terms of the actual musical content when they're working on these cases. But she said, and I thought it was really interesting because she said that in that blurred lines case, that the Pharrell Williams side actually sued the Marvin Gaye side and not vice versa. So it was like a preemptive suing, I guess. And that's something that maybe someone who knows more about the legal system can explain to us. But I thought that was really interesting. That was not what I thought it was at all. And another point from this talk that I thought was a pretty interesting thing to think about was Virgil Roberts actually said that our music copyright law is interesting and different because it actually encourages people to cover other work, right? So for example, you can cover someone's song without their permission, but you cannot ever cover someone's book without their permission. So our system for music actually encourages people to borrow from other people's work. And I thought that was a really interesting thing to think about. He also said that digital audio has changed how things are done a bit because people don't have to physically be together to create music. So there are a lot of empty studios and people making music in their own homes. And he said that that can interfere with the creative process because it's different when you're physically in the same space. So that's definitely more of like an old school approach, but I thought that was an interesting point to mention. So at the end of the talk, we watched and listened to some examples of things that were copyright claims or things that people have said, oh, this person ripped off this other song to make this song, right? I hope that makes sense. And then the panel talked about whatever that example was. And so I took some audio and video clips from this part of the talk and a few other parts of the talk. So I think I'll show a little bit of a clip now. So I hope you find it interesting.
This copyright infringement, typically the courts will look at a variety of things to make a determination. There's not really one thing that trumps everything else. But in music, historically, that has been melody. Melody isn't the only thing that makes music music, but in our jurisprudence, in the case law, for really over 100 years, what you see is courts saying, we don't care that much about rhythm, we don't care that much about harmony, we don't care that much about orchestration, it's the melody. And if the music has the lyrics, yes, the lyrics, but it's the melody that really makes the case, or doesn't, whether someone has copied someone else. And so, you know, one way to, at least one way to look at blurred lines is, and of course it's been controversial, is that court did in the realm of music what has already been happening in other forms of artistic expression.
Okay, I think we're ready to play. The trials were placed over 3 years ago, though there have been 2 appeals. So I was the musicologist on the side of Marvin Gaye's estate, and the way I testified had to do with how I saw the music. And my job is to analyze music on a very technical level in terms of pitches, rhythms, and all the other elements that harmony, structure, and all the elements that comprise a musical composition, lyrics, etc. And the misperception has been that all that the two songs had in common was the so-called vibe, the so-called style. And that was not at all. Anyone who was in the courtroom, which was a very lengthy trial, and heard the testimony would have heard, musical analysis of specific pitches, specific rhythms, particular sections of each song. And that was because, at least in my analysis, I thought the Marvin Gaye song had similarities with Pharrell Williams' song, but they weren't obvious. It wasn't like, oh, it's exactly like the hook of the other song. They copied it. It wasn't that obvious. It was much more nuanced and subtle. So what really it came down to after many, many hours and actually over a year and a half of study and analysis was that Marvin Gaye's song contained a series of similar features that could be heard in Pharrell Williams' song to the point where I called it the constellation of similarities. And it was basically a group of similarities that they shared in the music, in the composition. And that's, in the end, I think, the way the jury agreed. So,
we'll play the second song.
Anyway, so basically you have two songs that each have what you call the same hook, meaning the most recognizable melody that is actually the lyrics of the title. So, He's So Fine, My Sweet Lord. Those are exactly the same pitches when they're transposed in the same key, which is acceptable in court, and the same rhythms. So that's sort of dead on. So that's an example of how the copyright law supports the protection, even though Harrison said that he had not actually been exposed to the Chiffon song. But in essence, he lost the case anyway.
Yes, innocence is not a defense, right? So,
well, but you do have to prove access.
And so, nonetheless, remind us, was the case?
The jury, I think, found subconscious copying or something. I don't know if they call it subconscious, but the idea was he didn't do it deliberately, but he did it.
And
it was too close.
He was found guilty. Okay, two more. Audience agree. This one's pretty clear cut, right? Sadly, we all love George Harrison.
It's funny. I remember both of those songs. I'm older, and up until this moment, I never connected them. But not at all. George Harrison, My Sweet Lord, and the Chiffons, in my mind back then, just two songs by two different groups, 15 years apart. That's just me.
Yeah, but you own the copyright. And
I know I own the copyright. I'm just, it's very interesting for me to see that comparison.
Paula, as a songwriter, you think he unconsciously had heard it and copied it, or was it just melodically both something that people might independently come to?
Well, as early as the, I think, 1800s, people were saying all the good melodies are already done, right? So it's really hard to, particularly if you're talking about pop music. There are certain patterns of notes that are just going to come up again and again in pop music. There are other forms of music. I was looking at, even the Grammys are here next week, and if you look at the nominees for Best Alternative Music, I would posit that at least 3 of them are borderline atonal. It's hard to, if you listen to Bon Iver's album, you listen to Tom York's, and James Blake's, it's very hard to discern a melody pattern out of those 3 albums, right? But nonetheless, they would be able to, under blurred lines, go after something, and so
you still have to prove it musically. There has to be.
It's a very technical analysis here.
All right, guys, so it's supposed to be a shorty video week, but we're already way past the amount of time that I do for a normal video. So I think I'm going to just cut it off there, and I have a few more talks that I'll talk about for next week's video. So I hope that's okay with you guys. But as promised, I wanted to talk about how you can access videos of these talks. So if you go to NAMM.org, so what I figured out is that at NAMM, there are, I think, two main types of talks. So there are talks that are put on by NAMM, right? And so those are usually like, in the rooms that are upstairs in the hotels or in a separate area. There's like the NAMM Education Center, I think is what they call it. There's like a whole area for talks that's kind of in the main area when you first walk into the big convention center floor. And then there are talks that are put on by the individual companies, right? So there are talks that are at the Mix with the Masters booth. There are talks that are at the Waves booth, stuff like that. So my understanding is that what I'm about to show you does not apply to the talks that are within individual companies' booths, but the main talks that are put on by the NAMM organization, what they do is they send a camera person to each talk and they actually film and record the talk. So after one of these talks on Sunday, I went up to one of these camera guys that was filming the actual talk with a friend of mine, and we asked him if there's somewhere where we could access these talks. And so he said if you go to NAMM.org and then go to the NAMM U tab on the website, you can actually access all of these talks. So right now they just have talks from previous years, and he said it can take a couple months, sometimes even more, for the talks to actually get posted up here. But I would just keep an eye out up here to see the full video of the talks and see what they have available. I've actually started to go through here and watch talks from previous years, so that's pretty cool. But I just wanted to show you that before I ended this video for today. I'll have a little thing about this again at the end of my video next week as well. Because again, I'm splitting this video up into 2 different videos, right? So keep an eye out for more, if you're into the talks and knowing what was said at the talks, keep an eye out for my video next week. And that's basically it for today. So if you liked this video, please hit the like button, subscribe to my channel, check out my other videos, all the stuff that YouTube people love, right? If you want to support my channel more directly, I do have a Patreon, and it's patreon.com/CatoNoise. And my patrons do get access to additional content, and they will be getting access to additional content for this video as well. So if you're a patron, thank you so much. I really appreciate you. There will be some content for you on the Patreon page. And yeah, I come out with new videos every Wednesday, and thank you for watching. Okay. I wonder if you guys just heard my stomach gurgle. Oh, my stomach just gurgled while I was talking, and you might have heard it. I don't know. It's possible. Okay, have a good week, guys. Bye.